I have spent most of my life trying to forget the war, but some nights when the air is cold and still, it all comes back as if it happened yesterday. The trenches of the Western Front were full of horrors that no man should ever see. But what I'm about to tell you is not about shells or bullets. This is about the night the war itself seemed to hold its breath, and something else, something not of this world, rose up from the mud. It was the spring of 1916 near the Somme. Our unit had been holding a sector of trench that was half flooded, stinking with rot, and barely wide enough to move without brushing against a corpse laid into the wall. The rats were bold enough to steal bread right out of your hands, and the constant artillery had left us deaf in one ear. By then, we had grown used to the rhythm of the front, the whistles, the barrages, the long, grinding nights. But that evening, something changed. At first, it was the silence. You don't understand how loud war is until it stops. No gunfire, no mortars, no distant echoes rolling across no man's land. Just the wind pushing against the flooded sandbags and the distant call of a crow. Men poked their heads above the trench line, confused. Our sergeant muttered, "Not a damn thing moving out there." The quiet stretched too long. Even the birds fell silent, as though they too were waiting for something. Then came the smell. It wasn't gas. We knew gas well enough. This was different. A sweet, cloying odor, like flowers left too long in the stagnant water. It rolled through the trench in waves, coating the back of our throats. Private Miller gagged and swore it smelled like his mother's parlor left shut up for winter. We joked at first, trying to laugh it off, but no one really laughed. We were all thinking the same thing. Whatever it was, it didn't belong on a battlefield. Not long after, the mist came. It didn't creep in from the open field like normal fog. It rose straight up from the ground, pale and heavy, clinging low around our boots. You couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Shapes began to move in it. At least we thought they were shapes. Dark outlines, human-sized, but flickering, shifting, as though they were made of smoke. One of the lads, Torres, whispered, "Figures. I see figures." The rest of us told him to shut up, but in truth, we all saw them too. The sergeant ordered us to hold fire. We couldn't risk revealing our position to the Germans if this was some kind of trick. But deep down, I don't think any of us believed it was the enemy. The shapes didn't walk like men. They glided. And when they passed, the temperature dropped so sharp you could see your breath. One of them came close enough that I swear I could hear it breathing, ragged and hollow, as if it were dragging centuries of earth inside its chest. We stood frozen, clutching our rifles, waiting for something to happen. Private Daniels, the youngest of us, finally broke. He raised his weapon, fingers shaking on the trigger. Before the sergeant could stop him, he fired into the mist. The crack of the rifle split the silence like glass. For a heartbeat, the fog twisted and recoiled, as though alive. And then from somewhere deep in that white wall came the sound of screaming. Not German, not human, something else. And that was only the beginning of what we saw. When people think of war, they imagine chaos without end, a storm of noise and destruction, and most of the time, they're right. But in truth, the front line lived in rhythms. Weeks of waiting, repairing trenches, writing letters that might never arrive, then days of hell when the guns roared and the air turned to poison. That rhythm kept us sane. It told us in its own way what to expect. But what happened in the spring of 1916 did not fit into that rhythm at all. It was something else entirely. Our unit was small, maybe 30 men, and we had been rotated into a sector along the Somme that had been shelled so often it looked more like the surface of the moon than farmland. The mud swallowed boots whole, and bodies of men from both sides jutted out of the walls, frozen in half-buried gestures. Some were missing faces. Others looked asleep, their hands folded on their chests. You learn not to look too closely. The brass called the trench a quiet sector, which was their way of saying it wasn't worth much to either side. But quiet didn't mean safe. Snipers still picked off unlucky men. Shells landed without warning. And of course, there were the long, dead nights where the cold gnawed at your bones, and your own thoughts were as dangerous as the enemy. We were a mixed bunch. The Sergeant McKenna was a hard man with a voice like gravel. He had already seen too much war before most of us had learned to shave. Miller was the joker, always trying to get a laugh, even when it came out hollow. Torres was quick with a knife and quicker with a prayer in Spanish under his breath. Daniels was the baby, just 17, his uniform still too big for him. And then there was me. I was a corporal then, barely 22, already feeling like an old man. By the time the silence fell that night, we had been holding that sector for almost 3 weeks. We were filthy, half-starved, and numb. That's why the silence hit so hard. The war had become a machine, constant, grinding, predictable, and when the machine stopped, we felt it in our bones. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe the Germans had pulled back. Maybe a ceasefire had been called. Maybe the weather had choked off their artillery. But none of that explained the smell. None of that explained the fog rising from the ground. After Daniels fired into the mist and that unholy scream tore through the trench, McKenna snapped into action. He shoved Daniels down and barked for everyone to hold fire. His voice cut through the terror like a whip, but his eyes betrayed him. I saw it. He was just as shaken as the rest of us. We waited. The fog hung thick, curling against our legs, swallowing the trench walls until the world was nothing but white. The screaming had stopped, but it left an echo in our skulls, like the ring of a church bell you can't escape. Then one by one, the outlines faded. Whatever they were, they sank back into the ground, disappearing as if they had never been there at all. When it was over, the silence returned. McKenna finally exhaled and ordered a double watch. We sat in that trench, rifles clutched to our chests, waiting for the Germans to storm us or for the shapes to return. But nothing came. The next morning, everything looked the same. The mud, the wire, the corpses half buried in the trench wall. No sign of fog, no smell. If not for the bullet hole Daniels had put through a sandbag, I would have thought I had dreamed the whole thing. But the men remembered. None of us spoke about it openly, not at first. We muttered about the fog under our breath, trading glances when the wind shifted. Daniels avoided our eyes altogether, ashamed of what he had done. Miller, usually the loudest, had gone quiet. And McKenna, he started writing more in his little notebook, the one he carried in his breast pocket. I never asked what he wrote, but I always wondered if he was trying to put words to the thing none of us could explain. We didn't have long to dwell on it. The war never gave you that luxury. 2 days later, the artillery started up again, pounding the German side. The familiar rhythm returned, and with it came relief. It almost felt normal, but deep down, I knew normal was gone. I had seen something inhuman rise up from the earth. And though it vanished, I couldn't shake the thought. Maybe it hadn't been the first time. Maybe those trenches had been haunted long before we ever arrived. That idea stayed with me. Long nights when the guns fell silent for even an hour, I would listen. I would wait. And sometimes in the low wind, I thought I could hear it again. That faint, ragged breathing, as if the ground itself was alive. And sure enough, the fog returned. It did not wait long to make itself known again. War has a way of stripping men down to the bone. You live in filth, you eat whatever you're given, and you cling to routine like it's the only rope keeping you from falling into madness. When something breaks that rhythm, it crawls into your head and never leaves. That's exactly what the fog did. It returned 3 nights later, and this time, it didn't come alone. We were on rotation for watch duty when the air shifted again. It was close to midnight. Miller and I were sitting on the fire step, trying to keep each other awake, when we heard the silence fall, not gradual this time. One moment, we could hear distant shelling on the horizon, the occasional snap of rifle fire. The next, it was as if someone had pressed a finger to the lips of the whole front. Miller noticed it first. He stopped mid-sentence, cocked his head, and whispered, "Corporal, you hear that?" I whispered back, "Hear what?" "That's just it." "Nothing." And he was right. Even the rats, which usually scurried along the trench floor, seemed to vanish. The silence pressed against us, thick and unnatural. Then, just like before, that sweet, rotten smell rolled in. "Christ," Miller gagged. "That's the stink again." I gripped my rifle tighter. "Wake McKenna." But before Miller could move, the fog rose. Out of the earth itself. Pale, heavy, clinging to the trench floor and curling around our boots like a living thing. Within minutes, it filled the trench. Men stirred awake, coughing and cursing. Daniel sat bolt upright, his eyes wide with fear. "Not again," he muttered, clutching his helmet as though it could protect him. McKenna stormed down the line, barking orders. "No firing! No damn firing, you hear me?" His voice was firm, but I could tell by the way his jaw clenched that he was terrified. Shapes moved in the mist again. This time they came closer. Not flickers at the edge of vision. No, they were clearer. Human outlines, their features blurred, their movements slow and unnatural. One passed within arm's reach of me. My breath caught in my throat as I watched its head turn. Where a face should have been, there was nothing but darkness. "Mother of God!" Torres whispered, crossing himself furiously. The figure lingered for a heartbeat, then drifted past, its outline dissolving into the fog. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, like wind through broken glass. Then it grew layer upon layer, until the trench was filled with a low, mournful wailing. It wasn't words, not in any language I knew. It was grief given voice. Every hair on my body stood on end. Men covered their ears. Daniel started sobbing, rocking back and forth. Miller, pale as a ghost himself, whispered, "They sound like they're crying." And they did. The fog was alive with the sound of the dead. The next morning, McKenna called a meeting. We sat huddled around him, mud-spattered and sleepless. "We don't talk about this to command," he said flatly. "They'll send us off as shell-shocked, maybe worse. You saw what happened to Barnes last month. Barnes had been caught muttering about voices in the wire. They pulled him from the line, and we never saw him again. Rumor was he ended up in a hospital, strapped to a bed, pumped full of morphine until he didn't know his own name. So we keep our mouths shut," McKenna continued. "Understood?" No one argued. What good would it do? Who in their right mind would believe us? Still, McKenna sent out a patrol that afternoon to sweep the wire and check if the Germans had tried some trick with smoke or lanterns. 4 men went. Only 2 came back. The survivors were pale, trembling wrecks. They wouldn't speak at first, not to McKenna, not to anyone. When they finally did, it was in broken whispers. "They weren't Germans," one muttered. "They weren't anything I've ever seen." The other kept repeating a single phrase over and over. "They were calling my name." We pressed him for details, but he just stared through us like he wasn't really there anymore. The fog kept coming, not every night, but often enough that we started dreading sundown. Every time it lingered longer. Every time, the figures grew clearer. Once, I swear I recognized one of them. A man I had seen die in a barrage 2 weeks earlier. His jaw was half gone, his face twisted, but it was him. He turned to look at me, and in the black hole of his face, I felt recognition. Daniel's unraveled fastest. The boy barely ate, barely slept. He muttered to himself constantly, clutching his rifle like a child with a toy. One night, I caught him whispering, "They're in the mud." "They're in the mud." Miller tried to joke, as he always did, but even his humor turned bitter. "Guess hell's full, and they're spilling over into France," he said once, forcing a laugh that died in his throat. Torres spent every spare moment praying. His whispered Hail Marys threaded through the night like a lifeline. As for me, I tried to hold steady, but inside I was crumbling. Every time the fog came, I felt it digging into me, pulling something loose. I'd dream of drowning in mud, of hands clawing at my legs, dragging me under. And through it all, McKenna wrote in that damn notebook of his, page after page by candlelight. Sometimes I caught him staring into the mist with a strange calm, as though he were waiting for it to speak. Then came the night the fog whispered. We were all awake by then. No need for watch rotations. The moment the silence fell, we knew what was coming. The mist rose thick and heavy, figures drifting through it like smoke. But this time, amid the wailing, I heard something else. Words, faint but clear enough. "Corporal." I froze. The voice was my brother's. He had died the year before, in another sector. I had buried what was left of him with my own hands, and now his voice was calling me from the fog. "Come home, brother. Come home." I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't stop. The words slithered inside, curling around my skull. I looked around and saw the same horror etched into every man's face. The fog wasn't just whispering to me, it was whispering to all of us. Daniels broke first, again. He dropped his rifle and staggered into the mist, arms outstretched. "Mother? Is that you? Mother!" We screamed for him to stop, but he vanished into the fog. His voice echoed once, "I see you." And then it was cut short, swallowed whole. We never saw him again. The next day, McKenna gathered us. His face was hard, but his hands shook. "From now on, no one moves in the fog. No one speaks to it. Do you hear me? They're not who they sound like. They're not our dead. They're something else." Miller whispered, "Then what the hell are they?" McKenna didn't answer. He just looked down at his notebook, as though the answer might be hiding in its pages. That night, Daniel's helmet washed back into the trench with the rain. Inside, there was nothing but mud. And we knew then, with terrible certainty, that the fog was not going away. It was only getting stronger. By the time Daniels vanished, we were already half broken. But what happened next pushed us past the edge. It gave us proof, hard, undeniable proof, that the fog was more than just fear and imagination. It was rooted in something buried beneath our feet. 2 days after Daniels disappeared, a bombardment tore through the German line opposite us. When the smoke cleared, scouts reported a section of no man's land had collapsed in on itself. Command ordered us to check it out. They thought maybe the blast had exposed a German supply tunnel. We crawled across the cratered ground in daylight, mud sucking at our boots, the stench of rot clinging to the air. What we found was not a supply tunnel. It was a bunker, older than the war. Its entrance was half caved in, wooden beams splintered and blackened with age. McKenna sent Torres and me down first. We lit our lamps and ducked into the darkness. The air inside was cold, stale and heavy, as though it hadn't been disturbed in centuries. The deeper we went, the less it felt like a bunker, and the more it felt like a tomb. The walls weren't standard military construction. They weren't reinforced with modern timber or sandbags. They were lined with stone, carved smooth in places, etched with markings that didn't look German or French or anything I recognized. Torres muttered under his breath, "Esto no es obra de hombres." This is not the work of men. And I agreed. At the far end, we found a chamber, small, maybe 10 feet across, with a low ceiling that forced us to crouch. In the center was a pit, bricked around the edges. Bones jutted out of it. Human bones, old and yellowed, stacked like firewood. Some were shattered, others still intact. But all of them bore strange marks, scratches carved deep into the surface. Not teeth, not tools, something else. Beside the pit lay a slab of stone, smooth, rectangular, covered in carvings. Not letters, symbols, spirals, jagged lines, shapes that seemed to twist and shift when the lamplight flickered. Miller, who had followed us down, knelt beside it. He traced the edge with his finger, then jerked his hand back. "It's warm," he whispered. "The stone's warm." McKenna crouched down to look. He stared for a long time, jaw tight. Then he ordered us out. "Seal it. I don't care how. Collapse the entrance if you have to. No one goes back down there." But it was too late. That night the fog rose again, but this time it didn't wait for silence. It came even as the artillery thundered. Shells rained down, the earth shook, but still the mist seeped from the ground, thick and pale, swallowing everything in its path. And for the first time, it came in daylight. Men panicked. Some fired blindly into the whiteness. Others dropped to their knees praying. The figures moved through it all the same, drifting, gliding, reaching. Their shapes were sharper now, their faces clearer. I saw Daniels among them. His eyes were hollow, his mouth frozen in a scream that never ended. "Daniels!" Miller cried, lifting his rifle. "He's alive!" But McKenna struck the weapon down. "That isn't him. Don't you see? That isn't him." We retreated deeper into the trench, the fog chasing us. The wailing grew louder, mingled with the thunder of artillery until it felt like the whole battlefield was crying. And in that chaos, I understood. The bunker hadn't been German. It hadn't been military at all. It had been a burial place. Whatever was in that pit, whatever was marked on that stone, had been here long before we came. And now our war had stirred it awake. That was the night we stopped asking what the fog was. We knew the truth, even if we never said it aloud. It wasn't the dead of our war rising from the mud. It was something much older, answering to the slaughter. And it wasn't finished with us yet. We should have abandoned that sector the moment we found the bunker. But orders in war were iron chains. You didn't break them. We were told to hold the line, so we did. Even as the fog thickened, even as men began to vanish, even as our sanity unraveled. By the fourth week, our unit was barely recognizable. Daniels was gone. The two scouts who came back from the patrol never spoke again. One eventually shot himself with his service pistol during a bombardment, leaving nothing but a red smear on the trench wall. Miller, once the loudest voice among us, had gone silent. He barely spoke a word except to mutter, "They're watching," over and over. Even McKenna, our rock, was faltering. His notebook was half filled now, scrawled lines written in the dark by candlelight. I caught glimpses of it once, when he left it open on a crate. The pages weren't filled with words. They were covered in symbols, the same spirals and jagged lines we had seen carved into the stone in the bunker. He was copying them down, over and over, like a man possessed. We tried to confront him. Torres asked outright one night, "Sargento, ¿qué está haciendo? What are you doing with that book?" McKenna snapped the notebook shut and gave Torres a look that made my stomach sink. His eyes were bloodshot, feverish. "Understanding," he said. "That's all. Trying to understand." No one pushed further, but the trust we had in him was cracking. The next night, the fog rose higher than ever before. It didn't stop at our boots. It climbed, rolling up the trench walls until it hung waist-high, thick enough to choke on. Men staggered through it blind, bumping into each other, eyes wide with terror. Then came the hands. For weeks, the shapes had only drifted, only watched. But now they reached. Gray-black arms stretched out of the mist, long-fingered, jointed wrong, clawing at our uniforms. One soldier screamed as something dragged him down into the mud. We pulled at him, yanking, straining, but the fog itself seemed to harden around him, swallowing him whole. When the mist thinned, he was gone. We opened fire not at Germans, but at shadows. Rifles cracked, machine guns rattled, but bullets did nothing. The shapes flickered and folded, reforming as if smoke could not be cut. Still, we fired because what else could we do? The trench filled with noise, muzzle flashes tearing the fog apart for brief seconds at a time. In those flashes, I saw faces, dozens of them, men in German helmets, men in British caps, men with no helmets at all, their faces rotted, their jaws broken. Some wore uniforms from centuries past. Others had nothing but naked, twisted forms. All of them were screaming, and above it all, that same wailing rose louder, not grief this time, but fury. We fell back into the deepest dugout we had, 30 feet below ground. Lamps flickered on, casting long shadows across the timber walls. We slammed the door shut, piled sandbags against it, and sat in the dark listening to the wailing outside. Torres clutched his crucifix so hard it cut into his palm. Miller had both hands over his ears, rocking back and forth. McKenna sat apart, his notebook open, copying symbols even as the dugout shook with the weight of the fog pressing down. I finally snapped. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. "Writing won't save us." He looked up slowly, eyes glassy. "They're not here to kill us," he said. "They're here because of us, because of the war, because of all this blood." "No," I spat. "They're here to take us. You've seen it." McKenna just smiled faintly like he knew something we didn't. That was when the door shuddered. Something heavy slammed against it from outside, again and again. Each impact made the lamps swing wildly, shadows dancing on the walls. The sandbags shifted, wood splintered. The men raised rifles, though what good they would do, we all knew. Then silence. The pounding stopped. The wailing outside fell quiet. For a long, breathless moment, the only sound was our ragged breathing. Then the whisper came. Not outside, inside, right there in the dugout, curling out of the shadows. It was McKenna's wife's voice, clear as day, soft as lullaby. "Patrick," she whispered, "it's me." come home." His hands trembled. He dropped the pencil, his face breaking. "Mary," he breathed. We shouted at him, told him it wasn't real, but he staggered toward the corner where the voice came from. The shadows stretched, darker than they should have been, and something in them shifted. Torres leapt forward, dragging McKenna back by force. McKenna fought him like a madman, screaming his wife's name. The rest of us joined in, hauling him to the floor, pinning him down until the voice faded. When it was gone, he lay panting, sobbing like a child. And I realized then, if the fog didn't kill us, it would drive us insane one by one. The next morning, we crawled out of the dugout to find the trench littered with abandoned rifles and torn uniforms. Half our unit was gone. No bodies, no blood, just gone. Command sent word we were to prepare for an assault in 2 days' time, a full push across no man's land. The men looked at McKenna, waiting for his orders. He wiped his face with shaking hands, then gave us a choice. "We can stay, fight the Germans, pretend none of this is happening, or we can go back to that bunker. We can find out what's down there. Maybe put it to rest. Maybe end this." Miller spoke up, voice trembling. "And if it kills us?" McKenna closed his notebook and tucked it into his coat. "Then at least we'll know." Better than waiting to be dragged into the mud. No one wanted to agree, but in our hearts we knew he was right. That night, as the fog gathered on the horizon once more, we prepared ourselves. Not for Germans, not for artillery, but for the thing beneath the battlefield. We went at dusk because the light never helped us anyway. The sky over the line was the color of old tin, and the wind came from the east, sharp enough to sting the eyes. We took only what we could carry quiet: 3 lamps, 2 coils of rope, a shovel, 4 Mills bombs, a flask of lamp oil, and the little notebook that had swallowed McKenna whole. It was the 4 of us at the core, same as always: McKenna, Miller, Torres, and me. We added 2 others to make a team of 6. O'Rourke, who had the hands of a mason, and Finch, steady as a plumb line, good with knots. The rest of the unit held the trench and kept their heads down. We told them to ignore the fog if it came. We told them to pray if they had it in them. No one said goodbye. Men did not do that when the ground was listening. We slipped over the parapet and crawled out through the broken wire. The earth held the day's cold like a grudge. Shell holes yawned black around us, the water inside them shivering at the touch of the wind. From the German side came the odd crack of a rifle, then nothing again. Even the guns on the horizon were quieting, as if the whole front knew where we were going and went still to hear it. Halfway across, the smell found us, sickly sweet, like flowers put in a room, and the windows shuttered for months. It rolled low, hugging the mud. Miller gagged and muttered a curse he did not finish. Torres crossed himself and kept moving. The entrance waited where we had left it, a torn mouth in the earth, shored with old timbers and the last of our sandbags. We posted Finch at the lip to watch the field, then set a lamp and went down. The slope was slick, the walls damp. Water dripped in slow, measured beats, steady like a clock no one remembered winding. The bunker felt different the moment our boots hit the stone. Colder, yes, but not empty. It had the pressure of a church when the doors close, and the organ still hums in the wood. The walls were stone again, not army work, cut and set by hands that knew how to make the earth hold its shape. In the lamplight, the carvings stirred and settled, never quite what they were a breath before. We moved slow along the passage until it opened into the chamber, 10 feet across. Low ceiling you had to bow to, even if you did not believe in anyone's god. The pit sat in the middle, tight bricked rim like a well. The bones were there in their awful order, splayed and stacked, old enough to be the color of straw. The slab lay beside them where we had found it, a flat rectangle the size of a door, the carved symbols faint in the soot of our last visit. Even before we touched it, I could feel the warmth it held, as if it were a living thing with a slow, deep pulse. McKenna kneeled by the slab and opened his notebook. He ran his thumb down a page, then another, landing on a sketch that matched what lay at our feet. Spirals that hooked back into themselves, teeth of triangles. A line like a river cut by short bars as if to break the flow. He spoke without looking up. "I saw marks like these once in a chapel in Cork," he said, "carved in a lintel over a door they never opened. Old women said they kept the cold out. Priests said they kept worse out. O'Rourke cleared his throat. You think this was a lid? You think someone closed it and we knocked it open? McKenna nodded. I think we broke the latch on a house that was meant to stay shut. For a long beat, no one spoke. The lamp hissed, the drip counted seconds, and the warmth of the slab pressed against my hands where I steadied myself on the stone. Then something shifted in the dark behind us. A stir like cloth dragged over stone. Finch hissed from the passage. Movement! His voice sounded far away. The fog came in a breath later. Not a creeping curtain, but a spill, like water pushed through cracks by a hand on the other side. It rolled over our boots, climbed our shins, rose in a white weight that flattened sound. The lamp flame shrank and went to a hard blue point. In the fog, shapes formed. Faces, helmets, bare skulls with skin like paper, a jaw unhinged much wider than it should. Hold your ground, McKenna said. The words were steady, but the pencil in his fist trembled. Do not speak to it. Do not answer it. The first voice was for me. It came from the pit, and it was my brother exactly. He called my name the way he did when we were boys, and he had found a pheasant's nest in the hedges. Come and look, he said. You'll miss it if you wait. I set my teeth and did not answer. Every muscle in my legs pulled toward the sound. I gripped the rim of the pit so hard my fingers hurt, and still the voice tried to pry me open from the inside. Then the fog gave the others their share. I heard a woman whisper in McKenna's ear, soft and sure. Torres' father, drunk in Spanish, told him to come home, that it was time to eat. For Miller, laughter, boys' laughter, from a street in Manchester that had not seen a horse in years because the army took them all. O'Rourke said nothing, just stared hard at the slab as if it might speak a language that used stone instead of breath. Work, McKenna said. Now. His voice cut clean for a moment, and we moved. We tied rope to the slab, 2 lines, doubled, not set by Finch's hands. We poured a ring of lamp oil around the pit, maybe a foot from the edge. Torres stood with a match ready, and his prayer half whispered, half breathed, the words tumbling one after another. I could smell the oil's cold reek under the sweet rot of the fog. On 3, McKenna said. Lift and slide. We set our hands, bent our backs. The stone fought us. It did not lift, not at first, as if the ground itself had decided this was its proper place. Then it gave an inch, then another. The ropes creaked. O'Rourke grunted and set his shoulder under the edge like a man heaving a door shut against a storm. My boots slid on the damp stone, and Miller's breath came out in high, ragged gasps. From the fog, hands reached. Long fingers, too many knuckles, skin like wet paper. They found our ankles and tried to peel us from our stances, to unfoot us, to send us down into the pit. Finch slammed the butt of his rifle at them, wood thunking through mist as if hitting nothing. Yet the hands recoiled for a heartbeat anyway. He swung again and cursed in a steady rhythm, like a man chopping wood. Light it, McKenna said, voice thin now. Torres struck the match. The first flame guttered and died in the damp air. He struck another and another. The third held. He touched it to the oil, and fire shivered around the ring, a low blue line that ran with a hiss. The fog withdrew from it like a cat from water, and in that narrow gap I could breathe again. Again, McKenna said. Lift! We heaved. The slab came up. We dragged it, inch by inch, until its bottom edge kissed the pit's rim. Warmth pulsed under my palms like a slow heart. The carvings on its surface seemed to crawl, shifting in the lamplight, not changing shape but changing order, as if a phrase were being rewritten without altering a single letter. The voices rose, not just our dead now, older voices, rough tongues I did not know, grinding out words like stones against each other. The bones in the pit rattled as if something beneath them was drawing breath. Set it, McKenna said. Now! We slid the slab over. It balanced, then rocked, then settled with a sound I can still feel in the back of my teeth. The fire ring popped and threw sparks. The fog pressed hard at the edge of the flame, seeking cracks it could squeeze through. McKenna dropped to his knees and opened the notebook to a page covered in symbols. He pulled a bit of charcoal from his pocket, then paused. The charcoal snapped in his fingers as if the air had turned it brittle. He looked up at me, at all of us. with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Not fear, resolve. "It needs more than the lines," he said. "It needs a seal. Something living, something willing." "Like hell," Miller spat. "We all dragged it here. That is enough." The fog laughed at that, or maybe it was the jet of steam the oil gave when a drop of water found it. I choose to remember it as the fog laughing, because that keeps me honest about what came next. McKenna took his bayonet and pressed it to his palm without a flinch. He cut a clean line from thumb to wrist. Blood washed across his hand and dripped onto the stone. He set his palm to the first spiral and pulled a red curve that caught the lamplight. "Captain, no," I said, except he was not a captain, not on paper, but that is how he felt in that moment, and the word jumped out. "Hold the line," he said quietly. "We were always going to pay for this. Better it be counted." He drew each of the shapes from his notebook on the stone. Not perfect, not neat, but sure. Spirals closed, teeth met. The barred line broke and broke again. The air tightened, as if the chamber had clenched. The slab's warmth rose to heat, then to something like the nearness of a furnace. The voices in the fog changed. They shifted from lure to anger. The hands reached harder. Finch's boot went out from under him, and he hit the floor, heel near the fire. He yelped and jerked away, the cuff of his trousers smoking. O'Rourke caught him by the collar and hauled him up in the same motion he used to brace the slab when it rocked under the heat. The last mark would not take. The chalk lines and the blood lines faded as soon as McKenna traced them. He set his jaw, leaned in, and pressed his cut hand flat against the center of the slab. His blood ran down into the lines, into the carved grooves, and for a second everything was quiet. Then the slab drank. I saw it. Blood that should have pooled slid thin as thread into the marks and vanished. The stone glowed for an instant, not bright, just enough that my pupils tightened. The heat peaked. The fog drew back a hand's breadth, then two. A crack ran through the chamber roof. Dust fell on our faces. O'Rourke shouted for us to brace as more grit pattered down. Somewhere above, the earth shifted inside. "Charges," McKenna said softly. "If we are going to do it now." We had prepared as well as we knew how. 2 Mills bombs taped together, fuses set long. O'Rourke handed one to me, and I set it by the inner wall where the ceiling met the support beam. He set the other opposite. We were not sappers, but we had watched enough craters open to guess where the stone would fail. "On my mark," I said. My voice did not sound like mine. It sounded like the one I used in smoke when orders were the only rope we had left. Fuses, then out. We pulled the pins with our teeth and laid the bombs like offerings. The fuses began their thin, angry hiss. Finch grabbed the nearest rope coil. Torres leaned over the fire line and poured the last of the oil to fatten the flame. Miller turned to McKenna. "Come on," he said. "We are leaving." McKenna did not move. He had both hands on the slab now, one over the other, fingers splayed wide, blood still running. He looked at us with that tired smile soldiers save for the moment, before they go where you cannot follow. "Mary," he whispered. He did not say more. I grabbed his arm. There was no weight to him, not like there should have been. It was as if the stone had already taken part of him into itself. The fog pressed hard again, furious, and the fire lowed as the last of the oil burned off. "Time!" O'Rourke shouted. "We are out of time!" I made a choice I am still making in dreams. I let go. We ran. We ran blind down the passage, lamplight beating against the fog, then choking, then finding air again. Finch stumbled on the slope and I dragged him by his webbing, his boots kicking dust into my teeth. Behind us in that chamber, 6 paces by 10, the slab thrummed like a heart. I felt it in my jaw and in the meat of my palms. We burst out into the open hole. Night air hit like a slap. The stars were thin and hard. The field lay still as a painting. Finch went up first, then Torres, then O'Rourke. I shoved Miller to the lip and climbed after. We threw ourselves into the nearest shell hole and flattened against the dirt. The charges went off. The sound came up from the ground in 2 hard thumps that rolled through my ribs. The entrance folded inward. A cloud of dust and white steam blew from the hole and settled on us like flour. The earth shifted again, this time deeper, a slow grind like the lid of a heavy box moving a little and then catching. Around us, the fog bucked. It twisted, shredded, and pulled in on itself, folding toward the ground. The voices rose in a choir of fury that split into a cry that had nothing of men in it at all. Then the white in the air thinned. The smell went from flowers to a sharp mineral sting, and then to plain cold. We lay there waiting for the hands to grab our ankles again. None came. The field stayed a field. The wind moved. A crow called, one short sound like a cough, and I did not know if I wanted to laugh or weep. We crawled back to the trench at first light. The wire glittered with frost. The sandbags on our parapet sagged like old men's faces. The men who were left looked at us and did not ask. We must have looked like we had come from a very deep well. We counted heads. We did not speak the numbers aloud. McKenna's notebook slept in my coat, heavy as a brick. He had pushed it into my hands when we started to run, or maybe I took it without knowing. The front cover was dark with the print of his cut hand. The pages inside held the marks he drew again and again, and at the back a single line in his cramped, neat hand. Keep it closed. The guns started up again in the late morning. Rounds marched across the horizon, and the ground shook like it remembered its old work. Orders came down the line for the assault that afternoon, same as they had promised us days before. The war, which had paused to watch what we had done, began to move again. We cleaned our rifles. We cut new lengths of fuse for the bombs we had left. We ate in the way men eat when they are only feeding the machine inside their chests. I folded the notebook and slid it under my tunic, over my heart. And when the officer came to ask if we were ready, I told him we were, though I knew we were not ready for anything at all. We went up to the fire step as the whistles passed down the line like a rumor, and the sun climbed over the torn trees, and all I could think was that we had closed something that would hate us for it. What followed was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of the price. The assault across no man's land that day was like all the others: mud, barbed wire, and slaughter. But for us it was different. We had gone down into something older than the war, and when we came back up, the battlefield felt change. The ground itself seemed to shiver beneath our boots, as if it resented us for surviving. We went over the top with the rest of the division, rifles tight in our hands, bayonets glinting in the weak sun. Men screamed as they climbed the ladders, shells burst overhead, and the whistles of officers cut sharp across the din. It was chaos, yes, but a chaos we understood. Compared to the fog, compared to the pit, compared to the voices calling our names, this felt almost honest. Halfway across, Finch went down, a bullet through the throat. O'Rourke dragged him a few yards, but the boy was gone before he hit the mud. Torres kept moving, clutching his crucifix even as his rifle barked from the hip. Miller ran beside me, firing wildly, teeth clenched in a grin that was more madness than courage. When we reached the German trench, we fought like men already dead. The enemy looked as broken as we were, gaunt, hollow-eyed, half buried in their own earthworks. I saw in their faces the same dread we carried. Maybe they had their own fog. Maybe it was not ours alone. The fight blurred. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. At last, the whistles blew again, and we were ordered back to our line. We carried fewer men than we had brought, leaving behind more than we could count. By dusk, the field was littered with bodies in British khaki and German gray, heaped together like offerings to the earth. That night, the fog did not come. In the days that followed, the war pressed on, relentless. Orders were orders. But our unit was never the same. We had gone down into that chamber, 6 men strong. Only 4 of us lived to climb out, and one of those, Finch, never made it across the next field. O'Rourke carried the weight of it in silence, his big hands trembling whenever he lit a cigarette. Torres prayed louder than ever, his voice rough with desperation. Miller laughed at everything, a thin, bitter laugh that grated on the nerves. I kept the notebook. I read it by candlelight, staring at the spirals and jagged lines, wondering if McKenna had truly understood them or if he had only gone mad. When I closed my eyes, I saw him still, kneeling by the slab, both hands pressed to it, blood feeding the stone. I heard him whisper his wife's name, and I remembered the way the fog recoiled when the seal was drawn. We did not speak of him aloud. To the others, he was simply listed as missing in action. But we knew better. McKenna had given himself to something the war had unearthed. Whether it had accepted his offering or only tolerated it, none of us could say. Weeks passed, the front shifted, new divisions rotated in. We were pulled back to another sector, then another, until the Somme was only a memory. Yet the memory traveled with us. Every time the guns fell silent, every time the wind rose in the dark, we held our breath, waiting for the fog to return. It never came, not like before, but sometimes on still nights I swore I saw a pale wisp curl across the trench floor. Sometimes the men said they heard voices on the edge of the bombardments, faint, buried under the thunder. We never went back to the pit. I doubt anyone did. Maybe the charges collapsed the chamber for good. Maybe the stone still lies there, buried deep, sealed in the earth. Or maybe the seal broke again long ago, and the fog waits for another war to feed it. The Great War ended, but others followed. The fields where we fought are still fields of death. And I wonder whenever I hear of soldiers lost in the mud, if they too saw the fog. Now, decades later, I carry the memory like a wound that never closes. The Army buried our reports, chalked up the missing to confusion, to desertion, to madness. I never showed them McKenna's notebook. I keep it hidden still, its pages brittle, the spirals etched deep in my mind. When people ask about the war, I tell them the usual stories about the mud, the gas, the shell fire. I do not tell them about the fog. I do not tell them about the pit. Because who would believe it? Who would believe that beneath the guns and blood and wire, something older than war was waiting? But I know. Torres knows. Miller knew before he drank himself into the grave. O'Rourke carried it back to his family and never spoke of it again. And me, I hear it still some nights, a voice calling my name from the dark. We thought we had sealed it away. We thought the fire and the stone were enough. But I am not sure anymore. Because war never ends, and as long as men keep feeding the earth with blood, I fear the fog will always find its way back. It has been a lifetime since the Somme, yet the memories lie closer than yesterday. Time does not blunt them. If anything, it sharpens them. The longer I live, the more I realize that some things cannot be buried by earth or years. People ask about the war as though it were a story with a beginning and an end. They want tales of courage, of sacrifice, of mud and barbed wire. They nod politely when I speak of rations, of shell fire, of nights spent shivering under canvas. They want history they can put neatly on a shelf. What they do not want is truth, because the truth is this: we were not alone out there, not in those trenches, not in that mud. Something older than men moved beneath us, waiting for the blood and ruin we poured into the ground. And when it rose, it wore the faces of our dead. I have tried to tell myself it was madness, the strain of war breaking our minds. But I cannot believe it. I saw men vanish into the fog. I saw McKenna bleed into the stone and hold it shut with his own life. I saw the slab drink his sacrifice and the earth tremble as though grateful. These are not the tricks of a tired mind. Sometimes I wonder if the war itself was only part of it. If battles and nations are just surface noise, while below, the earth keeps its own grim account. Men fight, men fall, and the ground remembers. The world has not learned. We have fought more wars since, each one feeding the soil with more lives. I wonder if every battlefield wakes its own fog, its own pit. Perhaps what we saw in the Somme was not unique, only the first time we pulled the curtain back far enough to glimpse what waits behind. I keep McKenna's notebook still. I have never shown it, never dared. Some nights when the air is very still and the house is silent, I take it out. The lines blur in the lamplight, shifting like they did in the bunker. And sometimes, though I pray it is only my imagination, I feel warmth in the stone of the cover, as if it still remembers. So if you ask me what I fear most, even after all these years, I will tell you plainly, not the war, not the shells, not the gas. It is the fog. Because once on a battlefield drowned in blood, I saw it rise. And I am certain it is only waiting for the next time. You're still watching without subscribing? Fix it now. Subscribe, the next story is coming. And in the comments, share your country and the time you're watching this.